On behalf of the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion and the Liu Institute for Asia and Asian Studies, hello everyone and welcome to Religion in 60 Minutes. I'm Charles Powell. Today we are honoring the life and the teachings of Zen Master Thích Nhất Hạnh. There is a line in William Shakespeare's Hamlet, one that you're very familiar with, I'm sure, to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. What a complicated line. A complication that I hope will be extinguished in today's conversation with three wonderful human beings. I wonder, can we imagine a better world? What if deep listening was a non-violent solution to conflict? What if there was more awareness of the interconnectedness of all elements in nature? Buddhist author Alan Peto asked, how can we draw on the wisdom found in Buddhism to influence and change our government to affect the change we wish to see? The founder of the Plum Village tradition and main inspiration in engaged Buddhism, Thích Nhất Hạnh, the father of mindfulness, not only envisioned a better world, but had the courage to act in unconventional ways. Thích Nhất Hạnh was a prolific author. He was a prolific poet. He was a peace activist. He was a teacher. And he inspired tens of millions of people in the Buddhist tradition. What can we learn from his teaching and activism? What can we glean from his poetry? How can we live in harmony with nature and humanity? How do we plant seeds of joy? How do we plant seeds of peace? How do we plant seeds of understanding in ourselves? How do we live in the moment? How might insights from the father of mindfulness help humankind address current global crises and promote integral human development? This is the Keough School of Global Affairs. You knew that line was coming. These questions and other topics will be explored this hour. In this hour, I'm joined by Norbert Koppensteiner, Melanie Jin, and Sarwang Parikh to talk about this brilliant human being that inspired tens of millions of people around the globe. Thích Nhất Hạnh was born on October the 11th, 1926 in Hue, Vietnam, and passed away on January the 22nd, 2022 in Hue, Vietnam, the very place he was born. The Ansari team was sitting around the lounge and talking about his life and, of course, his passing. And my colleague who is in the room with us today, Alex Xu, said, we need to host a panel on the life and legacy of Thích Nhất Hạnh. And so here we are in this moment. Norbert, I am delighted to have you physically and mindfully present with me at Notre Dame. Norbert is a good friend of mine. We have enjoyed many wonderful glasses of wine together and consequently appreciated the art of simply being. Norbert is a peace researcher and freelance facilitator at the University of Notre Dame. He has been a senior lecturer at the University of Innsbruck, Austria, deputy head of the Unit for Peace and Conflict Studies, and the program coordinator of the MA program in Peace Studies at the same university. At Notre Dame, as a visiting research fellow, Norbert is advancing two lines of research. He explores the art of facilitation for peace and transforming conflicts with a special focus on embodied approaches. My friend, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, really.
Next, I would like to introduce you to Melanie Jin. Melanie is an innovator, She is a social change maker, and she is trained in mindfulness, systems thinking, as well as software engineering. She was born to parents of Japanese and Chinese descent and currently lives in Oakland, California. Melanie works at Code for America on a program called Opportunity Accelerator, supporting local governments in developing policies and processes that promote resident well-being and racial equity. Moreover, Melanie is the co-organizer of Sit, Walk, Listen. Sit, Walk, Listen, a series of peaceful demonstrations in the San Francisco Bay Area in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And she is currently caretaking a new movement within Plum Village called Beloved Community Circles. Melanie, thank you for joining us today for this very important reflection on the life of Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm intrigued and I am looking forward to hearing about this new movement you are leading at Plum Village. You, I believe, are really going to bring us closer to Thich Nhat Hanh. Thank you for being with us. I'm also joined by a captivating person and personality that I met while attending the Interfaith America Summit in Chicago in August of this year, Sarwang Parikh. He is a marriage and family therapist in Oakland, California. He offers therapy in the areas of culturally sensitive therapy, experiential therapy, humanistic therapy, integrative therapy, mindfulness-based therapy, multicultural therapy, positive psychology, relational therapy, transpersonal therapy, and more. Sarbang was born into the Dharma within a devotional Hindu Gujarati Indian lineage from an immigrant working class family raised in the South. They have been steeped in the practice and study of Vedic, yoga, and Buddhism, primarily with the Theravada lineage for nearly 20 years. Moreover, he is the interim director of Buddhist Peace Fellowship. When I met Sarbang in August, I knew then that I wanted him to be on this panel. And Sarwang, I am honored to have you and your wisdom with us today. Welcome. So, what is engaged Buddhism? James Madison University professor Sally B. King defines it this way. Engaged Buddhism is a contemporary form of Buddhism that engages actively yet non-violently with the social, economic, political, and ecological problems of society. At its best, this engagement is not separate from Buddhist spirituality, but is very much an expression of it. With that being said, I want to read a few of Thich Nhat Hanh's more famous quotes and see if any of you would like to comment further. So Melanie, Norbert, Sarwang, this is your moment. I'm going to read a quote and you just respond to it if you would. The first quote I'd like to share with you is this: walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet. What does that mean to you? Norbert.
Okay. Well, if I go first, and I think in light of where we are at today in the 21st century, I can take this to be an ecological statement, right? If we walk as if we are kissing the earth with our feet, this means we tread lightly. This means we cherish, we care, we don't trample, and we try to leave as small a footprint as possible.
Another quote: when another person makes you suffer, it is because he or she suffers deeply within him or herself, and his or her suffering is spilling over. He or she does not need punishment, he needs help. That's the message that is being sent. Who might respond to that?
Is it okay if I respond, Melanie? Yeah, as someone that works with a lot of folks that are often in different places of suffering, I think it's one of these really adept, empathetic statements that Thich Nhat Hanh really helps us draw into the the place of compassion, really recognizing how anyone's expression of even what looks like harm comes from a place of suffering. We can look at places of war, places of violence, aggression, all the isms that are we are surrounded inside of, and how much of that is disowned areas of one's own, usually one's own past, things that have happened, maybe that have not been able to be seen or accepted or understood by maybe people very much in our own family and communities themselves. And this opportunity to turn towards, I also think of not just help, but also come into acceptance and to be able to see the suffering and the humanness behind the being that might be expressing some kind of harm and violence.
Melanie, I think this next quote fits you perfectly because of what I've read about you and some of your work. To be beautiful means to be yourself. You don't need to be accepted by others. You need to accept yourself.
Yeah, dear community, thank you so much for this question and this opportunity to contribute to this panel. To me, this quote reminds me of something that Thich Nhat Hanh or Thai has said, where he's talked about a tree residing in a forest, and that the tree doesn't need to do anything, just needs to grow beautifully and be a tree. And think about a lot of the striving that I do in my life and how much that's influenced by societal forces, capitalism, wanting to make a lot of money or have a sense of stability that might not exist. And then I can also be with that image of a tree, just being itself, growing towards the light, providing shade, taking root in where it is. And I think that's what this quote really means. There's a sense of not needing to be accepted by anyone. I think the sense of acceptance, the sense of being just is.
One more quote. For things to reveal themselves to us, we need to be ready to abandon our views about them. How does that speak to you? Norbert?
Okay, well, I can go. I think it speaks to me in the sense of, on the one hand, holding my own truth lightly, yeah? And at the same time, also trying to look behind our preconceived notions and our biases, really. So if we think about the work of Thich Nhat Hanh also as a peacemaker, then a lot of peace building, I think, also is about that. Is about how we are willing to challenge our own assumptions and maybe see things differently than we have so far. To which extent are we willing to do that?
Causes me to think of narrative empathy as well. Really being able to see and to hear and to feel where the other person is coming from through their story, their experiences, and not my own. Dear Melanie, share with us, how did you come to know Thich Nhat Hanh? Moreover, if you could describe this relationship that you've had, and furthermore, how did the news of his passing impact you?
Dear friends. So I was lucky enough to find a Sangha in the Plum Village tradition about 5 years ago in San Francisco. At that time, I was experiencing a lot of suffering and loneliness and looking for a sense of purpose and community. This Sangha was the first time that I had experienced a deep sense of intimacy and vulnerability in a community of people outside of romantic relationship or therapeutic relationship. And that ability to show up with other people and be fully myself and to be witnessed as such was so deeply healing. And so I consider that to be my first encounter with Thich Nhat Hanh, that sense of deep embracing by a group of other people that I called my Sangha. Eventually, I traveled to Plum Village. I took the 5 mindfulness trainings, or the precepts in our tradition, and I'm now on the path of aspirancy to the Order of Interbeing, which is a community of folks dedicated to caretaking the Sangha. So many other encounters across the world. I spent a lot of time in Israel and Palestine, organizing Sangha there, and also helping to co-organize trips of young people from those areas to Plum Village, the monastery, to engage in dialogue. And let's see, I mean, there's so many other experiences of meeting students of Thich Nhat Hanh, meeting monastics and seeing their presence and really feeling his teachings in them. I'll just share one example of being in Hue, Vietnam for a couple of weeks and participating in all the activities alongside the nuns and monastics there. And one of the activities we had to do is working meditation. We were shoveling out clay from this road leading up to the monastery because the clay was making it hard for the motorbikes to travel into the kitchen. And so as we were walking, or as we were shoveling this clay and wheeling it down to this field about a kilometer away, one of the nuns just gestured for me to get into the wheelbarrow. And so she ended up wheeling me back up this gigantic hill. Both of us were just laughing like crazy. And I felt that real sense of joy and being together that Thich Nhat Hanh cultivates in his students and in his community. So those are just a few memories of being with Thai's community. In terms of my response to his passing, part of me was in disbelief because I just thought Thich Nhat Hanh would be immortal in some way and last forever. And I heard this sentiment from other folks in my Sangha. And there was also a deep sense of grief at never having met Thich Nhat Hanh in person and, being in various spaces that he created, but not being his physical presence. And I think that was part of it. But then there was also this other part of deep gratitude and wanting to really take refuge with my Sangha. Not so long after he passed, we held memorial services out in a park in San Francisco, and so many people came that I had never met before, and collectively discussed Thich Nhat Hanh's impact on their lives. And that sense of being able to bring strangers together into collective space to talk about healing in a deeply intimate way is like one of the legacies that I'll always carry with me from Thich Nhat Hanh. I will pause there and pass it back to you.
Melanie, I wonder if you can elaborate a bit more and just simply tell us a bit more about Plum Village, and more specifically, this new movement that you are part of within Plum Village called Beloved Community Circles.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of just want to start by saying that Beloved Community Circles, while it is a new initiative within Plum Village, the intention and aspiration is very old. And I think you described earlier engaged Buddhism as a practice of showing up to what's happening around us, meeting the suffering that's there, and discerning what a wise response and action might be. And so this is really the root of our aspiration with Beloved Community Circles. The name actually comes from the early 1900s, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which sponsored Thai to come to the States during the midst of the Vietnam-American War. They actually originated that name, and we know that Dr. Martin Luther King also used that to describe his community, where there are no barriers to love, where everyone is included. So that's kind of the root and aspiration of this initiative. Right now, it is a resource and emerging to support Sanghas who are interested in taking their practice off of the cushion and trying to figure out how to meet the suffering in their families and their communities and out in the world. So We have a retreat coming up in January. We have 3 or 4 groups that are currently emerging, and trying to figure out what the evolution is of engaged Buddhism at this current moment. I think, this is something that Thai practiced and worked for in his life. And, in some ways, the work that I've participated in with Sit Walk Listener is also part of this larger aspiration to not only take care of my own suffering, but to see how my suffering is interrelated with what is happening around me, and doing my best to show up for that suffering as well, being present to it, transforming it into healing and reconciliation.
Thank you, Melanie. If I might, Sarwang, just go directly to you now, because I think we can continue the conversation based on what we just heard Melanie share with us, her talk about suffering and healing. It's my understanding that in your therapy sessions, you provide a unique, dynamic approach to what is called talk therapy. You are grounded personally in over a decade of practices in mindfulness and an ongoing commitment towards your own healing that include expressive arts, trauma-focused somatics, and psychospiritual practices. You write that you honor each person's unique path of growth and wholeness. How does engaged Buddhism guide you personally, as well as in helping, and maybe a better word would be discipling, others along the way?
Yeah, thank you for the question and listening. Thanks for sharing, Melanie. Yeah, I feel really, kind of recognizing that in my own kind of coming into the Buddha Dharma, the kind of the laws of nature that kind of govern all of existence in some way, right? This is like what the insight that the Buddha was able to gain and attain in his own experience. Really is kind of like a compass that supported my own life and kind of trekking through the wilderness, the suffering that I've been in, which often kind of has a place of being lost. And it's a pretty accessible compass, but just it's not like a set of instructions. I wish it would be so easy. I could just read, here's what you need to do for X, Y, and Z in this life condition. But just like a compass, it has to be oriented to. And it really is a navigational tool that one must journey and kind of know how to move through life and know how to track. And in that way, I think these practices, teachings, have really, in a way, given me a true north, and to know when to right myself and still steady the path. And I think this aspect is really an element of learning to become more intimately attuned to the conditions of life, both internal and external. And this external ecosystem, kind of like as Melanie both beautifully spoke about, really demonstrates a lot of the conditions that are internalized. And I think in my own journey to deeply listening, to learn to listen to my own relationships, to our more than human kind of elements around us as well. It ties kind of teaching in such a simplistic but kind of aspirational place of kind of promoting kindness, peace, joy, while really engaging to support the decreasing of suffering that's available, that the suffering that can be optional to us. And I think part of this has been in this ability to, the engaged aspects, like really recognize that what has been internalized have been collective and social and personal kind of familial traumas. These are kind of the layers of healing that I see really deeply part of my own journey, and what I support clients in being able to track that it's not all them, right? That this myth that it's all me, I'm bad, I'm the I inside of something has become the thing that's broken. That is a view I think that has been really distorted by a lot of these collective traumas. And to be able to look at how things get passed down within cultures, within families, and this is also an ancient teaching, right? The sankaras, the seeds that get sown, and us being able to get free is really one, the recognition and the awareness, and then the practices of compassion and kind of fortitude to persevere, to kind of uproot those unwholesome aspects in both our intentions, thoughts, and then activity as we participate in building a beloved community, right? How do we do that? And it's not like a perfect harmony. It's in the conflicts of things that we learn to really see how do we gracefully learn to be together in this beautiful kind of menagerie of life. So that's how I'd respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarbang. Also, Sarwang, and I want you and Melanie both to know, because you cannot see the audience, correct? We have about 40, maybe 45 people in the audience here at Notre Dame, and then we have more online. So you're not just speaking to me and to Norbert, okay? Norbert,
Good to know.
my friend, yes, you, in theory at least, are a peacemaker. I don't know if all of your colleagues would agree with that, but in theory, at least, you're a peacemaker. You are a scholar, you are a practitioner, and I know that you do not have the opportunity to personally meet Thich Nhat Hanh. Nevertheless, he has deeply enthused you. In what ways has he inspired you personally?
Thank you very much. Well, what I would like to share is how he has inspired me, and at the same time also in that inspiration, how I have been challenged by that, how I still struggle with teaching and am provoked by it. Yeah? So I come to this, as you said, not primarily as a Buddhist, but obviously I come to this as a peace researcher, as somebody who has been in the discipline of peace studies for quite a few years. Yeah, and to just share a little bit about the background here, for those of you who are not from that field, the particular tradition I come from understands peace studies as a discipline, an academic discipline that is value-laden and normative from the very outset. So it is about peace building and conflict transformation. So we don't come to this as sort of disinterested and neutral scholars, but there's a normative stance to that. And the way this is translated as an ethical principle, for example, here at the also at the Kroc Institute, I hear that quite often, is the commitment to also stand with those who are the most vulnerable, to stand with those whose voices otherwise might fall to the margins. It's an aspiration, at least. I'm not sure if as a discipline we always succeed with that, but it is an aspiration. And it is something that I have held and still hold for a very long time, And then, as I guess many of you know, there is this wonderful and famous poem by Thich Nhat Hanh that's called Please Call Me by My True Names. Yeah, that I'm sure many of you know. It is quite famous, in which he, in the poem, doesn't just take the side of the victims, but also of those who might be called the perpetrators, not just the side of those who are at the receiving hand of harm, but also those who inflict it. Yeah? Not just those who at the limit point have been killed, but also, of course, of those who have been killing. Yeah? And what is more, he says that both equally are his true names. Yeah? And I think this really leads us to the heart and to the core of what empathy and compassion is all about. And he goes even further, and he says that reconciliation is not possible until we, and I take this to mean peace builders in this case, until we understand from the inside the suffering of each side. And if I look at many of the, since I'm an academic, I have the academic hat. If I look at many of the definitions of empathy within humanistic psychology, one of the most famous one, for example, is the one of Carl Rogers, who says that empathy is nothing else but the capacity to enter the private perceptual world of another person and temporarily understand it as if from the inside, without making judgments. I would say that's quite radical already if I try to put myself into these situations. And then Carl Rogers still holds on to this as if, right? Which in the modern Western tradition, we very much like to do. So this as if means I try to feel into what is there for you, but still there's a distance. Still I'm over here and you're over there. And Rogers, I think also for good reasons, says we can never really know what the other person is feeling. We can only make our guesses. And Thich Nhat Hanh in the end goes much further than that. This notion of interbeing, of understanding ourselves as ontologically, as truly co-arising, as in the end, in the last instant, and one really gives this understanding of these are my true names, a much more immediate and a much more direct and much more powerful way. So what I have been enthused by, Charles, as you so nicely put it, is exactly that, is every day anew coming to grips with the understanding that, yes, siding with the victims, I still hold on to that, is necessary. And at the same time, as much as I humanly can, not to make any new enemy images in the process. And as much as I humanly can, try to also be all partisan in the process of my work. And I find it deeply inspiring. I find it powerful because it sets into motion, and you see that, I think, in Thich Nhat Hanh, a presence that in and of itself, because it draws from compassion, because it draws from empathy, because it draws from this notion of oneness, already in and of itself has a transformative potential. And I think is not an altogether too easy stance to emulate, that within peace studies brings us in front of many difficult daily political, social, ethical decisions that need to be made, and to which I think there also are no easy answers.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Thich Nhat Hanh said, "The question is not whether to be engaged or not.
Yeah.
The question is how to engage without losing the contemplative life." COVID, climate, conflict. Norbert, we live in a disrupted world. Perhaps you can take a few moments and speak about what engaged Buddhism can mean for peace building, and then how do you integrate it into peace studies?
Again, my approach is a little bit the other way around. I come from peace studies, and I wonder what Buddhism where the two of them meet, right? So yes, we live in a disrupted world. So how do we respond to that is, I guess, the question that you're asking. Trying to attempt a little bit of a syncretism between those different perspectives. I would say we begin with not looking away. We begin with facing up to this world. You gave us, Charles, a quote of Thich Nhat Hanh at the beginning of this talk that I want to bring back here. For things to reveal themselves to us, we need to be ready to abandon our views about them. So it's not just at the sense of not looking away, of facing up to the world, but of letting go of our preconceived notion. Yeah, in the qualitative research realm, you could call this a phenomenological attitude, right? Of bracketing what we think we know about the world is epoche, of putting it to the background so we can see things how they really are. I think particularly for many of the challenges that we are faced with today, think about all the injustices across the world, think about gender inequalities, think about racial justice, being willing to question their own perspective without looking away, but staying with that in and of itself, I think already can be quite transformative. So there is a way of seeing, I would say. And then the question is, what do we do? How do we act, right? How do we still respond? And here, one of my favorite texts of Thich Nhat Hanh's, Being Peace, I think is a very poignant reminder, no? Because he doesn't talk about, the title of the book is Being Peace. Being peace. The title of the book is not Building Peace. The title of the book is not Making Peace. It is, in every sense of the word, a being. So an understanding that what we do in the world becomes effective based on who we are in the world. So based on relational qualities, for lack of a better word, like empathy, like presence, like mindfulness, like congruence. So I think how that can be useful for us now, particularly in peace studies, if I really speak about the discipline of peace studies, is in the awareness that the skills we have and that we need in order to be effective in the world, and the knowledge we have only gains its real strength if it is carried by these underlying qualities of being. To say the same thing slightly different, and maybe you've had this experience, I have had this experience. You can say all the right words and do all the right things, but still, if it is not carried by this underlying quality of awareness, by this underlying quality of empathy, to be even more radical, this underlying quality of love, usually the words will fall flat and will ring, in every sense of the word, inauthentic in our ears. So I think what we can appreciate, take, learn, understand more deeply from that within peace studies is that, yes, we need to make time in our teaching, in our training, in all the things that we do to train those qualities, practice those qualities of being, rather than just those aspects of doing that we sure also need, right? But maybe they're not the most fundamental point. Maybe they're not the most crucial point. Maybe they are not what really carries the transformation in its depth.
If we were not in the midst of flu season and COVID season that seems to be ongoing, I would encourage everyone just to breathe in and breathe out a few moments.
Absolutely.
From the heart. Genuineness, authenticity, humanness. Sarwang, many of my colleagues at the University of Notre Dame are professors. The research, the writing, the teaching, and the community service can be daunting. And consequently, many professors are stressed, and perhaps some of our university psychologists and counselors can tell you that they are even traumatized. Thich Nhat Hanh said, "It is best not to say, 'Go away, fear, I don't like you, you are not me.' It is much more effective to say, 'Hello, fear, how are you today?'" Reflecting on somatic therapy, what words of wisdom can you share with some of my colleagues and friends that are here today, and how How can these words of wisdom bring healing to the mind, the body, and the spirit?
Thank you for that question. And for those of you that I can't see, thank you for being a teacher, being an educator, being a student in life. I think I didn't say this, but most of my practice, many of my, the majority of people I've worked with have been students in my previous life. And then also currently, at least half of my clients are educators in all ranges from higher ed to high school. And I have a deep love for that field, and also recognize again the deepest recognition here. It's not you. There's a system that we're inside of that makes it really hard to do the work that we, love to do, in the cherishing of passing along knowledge and critical thinking and capacity to learn. It's to do that in this particular context is a tremendous effort. And Thich Nhat Hanh's kind of ties statement around being able to, in a way, I think about like being able to greet the suffering that's here, befriend it, turn to it, not as an enemy, but as a teacher, because this would be a portal to which our healing liberation lies, right? So the suffering that we are actually here is not something to get rid of, but it's actually the gift bestowed upon us in order to help us get free. If we did not have these frictions and points of suffering, right, then we'd probably be complacent, right? And I think the adverse here is like the suffering as a disruption actually allows us to wake up to something that's beyond this. And I think this capacity to kind of feel it and know it in our body, this kind of soma, this tender mammal self. Thich Nhat Hanh's words, he says, he always brings in the sensory experiences so beautifully to me. His poetic kind of imagery are so sense-filled that in its direct form, it allows me to be in contact with, I think, this like the fragility of our bodily self. And I think being able to feel and experience that suffering as a nervous system, right? The tools of kind of modern science to be able to translate some of this, these sensory perceptions to understand how this living, breathing kind of anatomy kind of is in coherence together, and to be able to come to soothe and regulate, right? To learn what it means to be in a befriending relationship that allows things to soften around the points of pain. One of the first places to reduce inflammation on a very literal level, right? But I think the inflaming of the mind and heart and spirit that comes as our stress kind of builds up is, I think of his words, he often, the images of Thich Nhat Hanh, just even in still form, kind of hugs my being. And I think about that as this embracing of ourselves, embracing of our suffering, and if even embracing our own bodies, like I'm doing now. If that's a way that allows me personally to just actually not go beyond where I need to go, right? Really to just stay with, this hurts. This is hard. Not that it shouldn't be hard or I'm not doing it right because it's hard. It's just hard. This is what hardness feels like in this moment. And allowing that to be met, I think, allows for something else to be shown as what's the next step, what's the next breath, where's the next place that something else wants to be revealed. Like you said, Norbert, in such a beautiful way, right? Just to allow things to be let go is really the path of this practice. And fundamentally, what we're letting go is that we can let go of our suffering. And maybe you can't let go of the academic rigor that you're holding yourself into, but right there's a way of how do you do that within the non-efforting of it. And yeah, I'll pause there.
Thank you. Melanie, philosopher Anne Gleig wrote, "The terms engaged Buddhism and socially engaged Buddhism were taken up by loosely connected Buddhists in Asia and the West, who adapted Buddhism to a range of nonviolent social activist projects such as peacemaking, human rights, environmental protection, rural development, combating ethnic violence, and women's rights. How has engaged Buddhism influenced your leadership in the Black Lives Matter movement in the San Francisco Bay Area?
Dear friends, thanks so much for the question, Charles. I'm going to start by saying, not necessarily a leader of the Black Lives Matter movement, but I care deeply about racial equity and justice and have been organizing as part of a Plum Village Sangha. So in 2020, after the death of George Floyd under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer, a group of us organized a series of mindfulness gatherings as public protest in the streets of San Francisco and Oakland, in front of San Francisco City Hall, in Oscar Grant Francogawa Plaza in Oakland. And we met regularly in groups as large as 200, as small as 15 people, to sit or to meditate in a stationary posture, to walk or to move, and to be in dialogue with each other. Oftentimes folks coming together from different parts of San Francisco or Oakland, different communities, to talk to each other, to process and to grieve what was happening in 2020. This was also during wildfires across California. There was a day where we weren't able to see the sun, call it like the orange sky day. And we were also out during this period of, visibly being able to see the climate emergency that we're in. So how do we come together in public spaces and make the practices of meditation and mindfulness and the possibility of healing and transformation accessible to folks? This is what we were really trying to explore. How do we bring these practices outside of a temple or a monastery into the streets so that people who don't identify as Buddhists or even meditators are able to see and bear witness to these practices that I hold so dear? And just to provide some examples, I remember we would have listening circles as the last activity in each event. And during some of the initial events, folks would share about their fear for their Black sons, or other people would come with family members who were police officers who joined the police force to really serve their communities. And so in a way, it's a ability to come together and see each other as human beings and to develop empathy and understanding. And Thich Nhat Hanh said that to understand is to love, and to love is to understand. And so our aspiration was to bring people together so that we could first see each other as the starting point for beginning to understand and beginning to learn to love each other. And I think, the courage and that it takes to do something differently, whether that's to speak differently or behave differently, to consume differently, it's not something that I just have in my body. I need to cultivate it. And I also need to be surrounded by a community of people, a Sangha, that is able to support me in those efforts. And so this practice also was being able to bring together people to see each other and to commit to doing things differently. Because if we can see the people that are being harmed, if we ourselves can share our own suffering, the ability to empathize and to love makes it possible for behavior change, for the way that we speak and act to change. And so that's what Sit-Walk Listen was for. And it emerged out of the Black Lives Matter movement in support of folks who were doing that organizing on the ground, but it evolved to support other situations as well. I think in March of 2021, when 6 Asian women were killed in Atlanta, we brought out, we had an organized event around that as well. So it's really about responding to suffering in that elemental way.
This is Religion in 60 Minutes. We started at 12:05. We will end at 1:05. And I want us to take a few moments here to see if anyone in the audience has some questions for one or all three of our panelists today. If you do, Josh will bring a mic to you.
Thank you for these inspiring message. So I'm a Catholic theologian and I study the history of Christian mysticism. So this is a beautiful tradition, very different, but with beautiful resonances. And right now in the Catholic Church, we celebrate the season of Advent, which is a season of hope. And so my question, and what I would really value learning from any of you who would care to respond, is what is the source of your hope in a world in which it's so easy to be hopeless? What is the source of your hope in your own groundedness in your tradition? Thank you.
Anyone who would like to start? What is the source of your hope? Okay, Sarwang?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to kind of some of the fundamental tenets of kind of Buddhist thought, right? That there's suffering and that there's a way out, that there is a way out, and that whatever suffering that we're experiencing now, it's not new in a sense. Like suffering has existed ever since humans have existed, and people have been waking up and liberating, and civilizations evolve and grow, and none of that is impeded by the suffering that we're inside of. I feel like Thich Nhat Hanh, existing as he is, reminds me so beautifully, even as he's moved into a different plane, and his legacy continues as he reminds us through our conversation here, right? This gives me hope. This exists because of that point of love and peace that has been incarnated and kind of actualized by beings everywhere. And even though we don't always get to be tuned in and see it, it's everyday acts of this type of love and kindness that I'm learning to be even more sensitive to and tuned into, like turn the channel directly to that place as a part of the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows, which are also kind of held in a balanced wing as part of what we're kind of here to experience in life. That's how I respond. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the response. I wonder if there might be another question in the audience. This question did come in, and perhaps after Mahan asks a question, glad to have Mahan with us. He, as many of you know, is the executive director of the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion. But after Mahan asks this question, I have one online question. Mahan.
Yes, thank you all, and thanks, Charles, for moderating this panel. I wonder if any one of you could help us situate Thich Nhat Hanh, among sort of the Buddhism at large, like in relation to someone like the Dalai Lama, and then go beyond Buddhism, contrast to someone like Pope Francis, who is speaking about these global issues, but he's in a very structured kind of religious tradition, situated at the Vatican, has encyclicals. How would you compare, what Thich Nhat Hanh has been doing with these other figures?
Of course, Norbert is always on the spot because he's right here. But Melanie, would you like to respond, or Norbert, or Sarbang? They're thinking.
Well, if I may, I don't really feel qualified to situate Thich Nhat Hanh in relation to the other Buddhist trends and traditions. I think this is a question I would rather leave to the practitioners. But I do think that if we do this vast comparison, right, between, let's say, Pope Francis and the Catholic tradition and Buddhism, then I think we need to recognize both the differences and the commonalities. Yeah. So one of the differences, Mahan, as you have already mentioned, is that there is a structured hierarchical system within Catholicism that is rather unlike, I think, what you find in Buddhism. However, when it comes to questions of empathy, when it comes to questions of care, I do think that with notions like caritas, for example, or agape, we also find similarities, overlaps, also within the Catholic traditions that allow us in an understanding of this complex and inexplicable caring for each other and for our lives together here on this planet. Yeah.
Sarwang, Melanie, I don't know if you can tell that I'm looking at you now, but might you have anything you would like to add? Okay.
I would just add that I imagine that they would be friends in some way, and that they're contemporaries in some relationship around. The distinction is the cultural context that each of them arise in, like Norbert was speaking to. And each of those cultural contexts, for Thai, Thích Nhất Hạnh, Thai means teacher, for those wondering that why we may refer to him as Thai. It came from Vietnam at a time of war and conflict. That was his emergence, right? As a being that was deeply impacted and had to flee those contexts. Dalai Lama similarly arose within Tibetan tradition and had to flee his homelands. And I don't know as much of the stories of Pope Francis, and I think the cultural context of these beings gets to both empower them and also, I imagine, perhaps we can use the word potentially constrain, but I wonder if it's more like these are the conditions in which they have to negotiate and navigate their power and influence and responsibilities, right? And this is their kind of way of influence in that way.
Yeah, just let me add something, since you said Pope Francis, and this reminded me of something. Now, I'm not a theologian, and I also do not know so much about the Christian mystic tradition. But obviously, the name Francis, in and of itself, I think is rather telling if we tie it back to Saint Francis of Assisi, because I think that if you look at the Canticle of the Sun, for example, I mean, this is nothing else but a celebration of our interrelatedness, really. Yeah, and because it is addressing all of existence as through a system of family relations, as siblings, as father, as mother, as all of these aspects. Yeah. So walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet speaks to a similar relatedness, I think, and speaks to a similar understanding of an underlying oneness. Yeah, so I think there are moments of overlap, and there are similarities that I think are interesting and fundamental to explore. Again, I don't feel confident to say if that is the mainstream interpretation within Catholicism. I'm not a theologian, so I do not know so much about that, but I do think that those commonalities, certainly with the mystic traditions, are there. I think those speak to some of the differences. Again, and both those who know more about the theological aspects of Catholicism and those who know more about Buddhism may forgive me if I do complete injustice here to the approaches. But I think one of the hallmarks of Buddhism is that it is radically experiential, radically empirical, and in this sense, and always calls us back to this direct embodied experience as sort of check for what we can hold on to. Whereas in the Christian tradition, which again, to go even further out there, I think it's the same probably for all the three monotheistic religions, we are much more drawn towards the text. We are much more drawn towards the authority of the scripture. So, and I think I'm gonna, and I think this then also leads to different forms of agency, really. Yeah. And before I go completely out on a limb here, I'm going to leave it at that.
And I don't recall the title of the book, but Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama sat down together. What's the title of this book? I forget. It's a conversation, I believe, between the two of them. But I think that book speaks volumes to the relationship that can be held and perhaps is held between Pope Francis and other Buddhist teachers. Melanie, Norbert, and Sarwang, thank you for spending time with us today, for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your wisdom, and for sharing your experiences. I leave you with a word from Thich Nhat Hanh. Love and understanding are not only concepts and words, they must be real things, realized in oneself and in society. Special thanks to the Lu Institute for Asia and Asian Studies for co-sponsoring this event. On behalf of the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion, housed in the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame, thank you for being with us. I'm Charles Powell, and from all of us at the Ansari Institute, be well.